When I was younger, my old toys used to go off, and I used to somehow fall off my old high raised bed. Now I see figures from men to women to kids. They're all full black. I sometimes hear ghosts sigh. Once in 2018, I ran out of my room because something said something under my bed. Then my sister ran out saying the same. I had a terrible father. He was kicked out a few years ago and never seen again. He had bad energy. I always feel like someone is watching me when I'm alone. I used to hear cabinets and drawers go off in the kitchen, opening and closing. But when I looked, they were closed. Once, all of my DVDs flew, like someone was pushing it. In 2021, I was awake at 1 a.m. My front door sounded like someone was bashing it. But when I opened it, no one was there. That was the scariest thing ever. My family rented this house over the winter of 1987 and 1988 while our new house was being completed. The landlady was a particularly nice woman who I believe was a nurse at one of the hospitals nearby. There was a downstairs tenant, a fellow by the name of Tony. If memory serves me correctly, he works at the Swiss chalet that was near there. Strange occurrences were starting to take place in the house. My mother, who was left alone in the house during the days with my infant brother, noticed the front door would never stay shut. She would close the door and even lock it and put the dead bolt on it only to find it wide open again after a short period of time. This would happen numerous times each day. On one occasion, my uncle stopped by during the day unannounced. He walked through the front door and scared the living daylights out of my mother. He said, "The door was already opened, so I came in, but you really should keep it locked." She explained to him what was happening. They closed the door and locked the door and watched it with astonishment as it swung open again. I can recall one evening we went to St. Herbert for dinner. The house was all closed up when we left, and when we returned, the front door stood wide open again. The door to the basement also had a mind of its own. I recall there being a really, really thick carpet in front of the door, which had not been planned to accommodate for the height of the pile. The door which led to Tony's apartment was kept locked, and because of the carpet was nearly impossible to open. Open it did nearly as Open it did nearly as often as the front door. I recall my father applying quite a bit of force to the door to push it back to the closed position. Neither myself nor my mom were physically strong enough to open or close that door, even if we had access to the key. There was always the feeling of being watched in the house. Like you were never alone. This is what I attribute my insomnia to. While living in that house, it was just a really strange atmosphere. My mother said after we moved out that she felt as though there was someone watching her all day long. Years later, my brother, who was an infant at the time, told us that there was a clown, of all things, that tormented him in his room, constantly laughing and being up in his face. This triggered a memory in me as well, and we both described this friggin' clown right down to the color of his hair. I don't recall hearing any laughter, but the laughing faces so close to mine. I never saw a body, just a round, chubby John Candy-ish face in clown makeup. To this day, I can close my eyes and see it. Ugh, clowns in the bathroom and the hallway, outside the bedrooms. We had one of those senior sensor lights that would come on when it got dark in the middle of the day while was still quite bright outside. These lights would go on and off at will. At night, they would go off without warning. My mother had one encounter that really set her on edge. While home with my brother, she was working in the kitchen. She left the room to check one of my brother, and when she returned, one of the top cupboard doors was opened, and a previously unopened bag of sugar was tipped or set neatly on its side, its contents piled on the counter and the floor below. The sound of shuffling feet was heard throughout the night in that house. A slow, deliberate shuffling of feet on the carpet, but no one was up or in the areas. Be heard from the it could be heard from the only person who claimed at the time to have seen a full-blown apparition in the house was my grandmother. She had come to visit and was staying in my room. I was sharing my parents' room during her visit. She told us that she had heard the shuffling in the night and, like me, was unable to sleep in my room. She told us that she sat up in the bed, turned on the lamp, and began to read. She heard the shuffling again and looked up towards the door, which was always open. She told us that she saw the figure of an old woman in a long white gown slash nightgown past the door. Very woman in a long white gown slash nightgown past the doorway. Very slowly. She said she called out to the specter, thinking it was my mother going to the kitchen for something, but the woman did not turn or acknowledge her. She got up and looked out into the hallway and saw nothing, literally nothing but darkness. By the end of our time there, we were so rattled and unnerved that the four of us slept in one bed. When we mentioned the goings on the landlady, she smiled and said she had heard stories like this before. She explained to us that previous tenants had been mediums and conducted scenes in the house. It seemed that some of the guests hadn't left. This house in 1987 to 1988 was definitely inhabited by spirits and entities beyond which conventional science can explain. I am in not claiming that this property is currently haunted or it is still a site of paranormal activity. I don't know if the problem was ever addressed it after we moved out.